So I'm here still at school and I'm recording this, so I'm hoping that we get through all this material that I'm thinking we will get through. And so I just want to talk about a couple of things because on Monday I'm going to have you read Common Sense in your own words. Now, I want to give you a little bit of background about Thomas Paine. So Thomas Paine writes this pamphlet, and Thomas Paine, you should know, was an Englishman who came to live in America not very long before this, like a little over a year, like 15 months before he wrote Common Sense, and it gets published, as like a little pamphlet, like a tiny little booklet. And once you read this with your group, you'll really kind of understand the tone. Like the tone he's pretty angry, he's very forceful about it. He really says like reconciliation can't happen. You know, the king doesn't care about you, just cares about wealth. You kind of have to condemn the monarchy and embrace democracy, reject your British heritage. This is where we're going to start seeing the shift away from Anglicization because of some of the things that he writes. The English Constitution to Thomas Paine, he says, is like a sham, and it's we can do so much better. We will win. Like he's very like, we are going to win. Yes, this is like a done deal even before the first shots are fired. What happens if we try to reconcile? If like we just keep taking it and allowing more and more taxation without representation to happen, we're just going to like lose ourselves. We're going to ruin the continent, he kind of says. So as you read through that with your group, I hope that you're kind of that you remember when you read and then when you hear this about some of these things that Thomas Paine was talking about. And I do have to say that Thomas Paine is hugely influential. This tiny little pamphlet, Common Sense, was very, very influential to the beginning of the revolution. Thomas Paine publishes this before the revolution really begins, and there's like kind of no going back after this. Okay, so I'm just going to go through these a little bit. Hopefully we got through some of these in class. And the effort for American independence was energized by colonial leaders such as Benjamin Franklin, as well as popular movements that included the political activism of laborers, artisans, and women. Paul Revere, you might have heard of Paul Revere. Hopefully that we're going to get a chance to look at his first engraving, or the engraving of the Boston Massacre. Mercy Otis Warren, a really influential woman who speaks out as kind of a liberty for women. She was a poet, she was a historian, and speaking out at a time when women weren't really in that role. John Hancock, we have John Hancock days here. He's the first one to sign the Declaration of Independence. Sam Adams, John Adams, the Sons of Liberty. We'll talk about the Sons of Liberty in class, and then we'll talk about the First and Second Continental Congress in class. But what I want you to know is like the First Continental Congress was that one to first meet after the Intolerable Acts, after the Coercive Acts. The First Continental Congress meets, and then they decide, you know what, we're going to table this and we're going to meet a year from now. And then the Second Continental Congress meets, and that is 1776. So in the summer spring of 1775, and then they meet a year later in 1776. And we see by July of 1776, we are going to sign the Declaration. And so this is a whole kind of like process. And what I want you to realize is that this isn't a short process. A lot of people are like, this is going on for a long time. The rebellion continues to foster, to fester, to build. There's still a lot of people who don't agree that this is what we should do, though. That like we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot if we separate ourselves from the most powerful empire in the world. Like Britain is the most powerful empire in the world. Why would we do this? Well, we just can't take it anymore. So I want to just briefly mention the beginning of the war. Oh, I have this picture up. In the face of economic shortages and the British military occupation of some regions, men and women mobilized in large numbers to provide financial and material support to the Patriot movement. On this one, I have both of these on there, the Committee of Correspondence and the Minutemen. Real quick, I need to talk about the Committees of Correspondence. Sometimes we refer to the Committee of Correspondence. It was a group that basically said, how can we get together? How can we make this work? How can we reconcile our differences and not break away from Great Britain? And there was something that was given and presented kind of to Parliament, actually kind of to the King, but it didn't even really get to the King. It was presented, it was called the Olive Branch Petition. So I do need you to write that down, the Olive Branch Petition. The olive branch petition, if you know anything about extending the olive branch means you're trying to make peace. Well, the Committee of Correspondence wrote up this olive branch petition, and they deliver it to Parliament to basically say, here's our grievances, we want to work it out, what can we do to reconcile and come back together and not make this it was a last ditch effort. It really was a last ditch effort to see if the King would adhere. In fact, Parliament doesn't even actually deliver the olive branch petition to the King. They really kind of disregard it. The King hears about it and he's like, whatevs. He doesn't care. And so now it's on. They felt like they've kind of done all they could. One thing I will add, the Committee of Correspondence might not have been as, the integrity of the olive branch petition might not have been there, because the list of grievances that they had were sometimes a little bit frivolous, and they were just trying to kind of air what they felt were wrongdoings. But they were maybe even more than perceived wrongdoing. So a lot of people say, well, the olive branch petition was just a show of face, it wasn't even real because it was so bolstered up with how bad Britain was. But that's maybe for us to decide and debate now. At the time, it was delivered to Parliament. It never even reached the King. It was completely disregarded. So now a lot of people are coming on high alert. The Minutemen of Massachusetts, this is a picture of a Minuteman. In fact, if you know anything about the University of Massachusetts, this is their mascot, the Minutemen. And they were to be put on notice in a minute. They were the first National Guardsmen. If you know anything about the National Guard, or you know anybody who is in the National Guard, they have to they do their training once a month and 2 weeks a year. But if something happens, they have to be ready to deploy and be at service in a matter of minutes, days really. So the Minutemen were these mostly farmers, probably, could have been businessmen, people who are willing to step aside from their job and go and fight for the cause. And in this case, it was the Patriot movement. Not so much the other side, although there would have been people who would have very much taken up the loyalist side. Okay, so just one more thing that I want to get to then. Despite considerable loyalist opposition, that's important. Considerable loyalist opposition, as well as Great Britain's apparently overwhelming military and financial advantage, the Patriot cause succeeded. So I would say, there's lots of different, I have it right here, there's lots of different statistics. About 40% of the people were active patriots, but 40% of the population is not a majority of the population. So I do not want you to think that everybody was totally a patriot and wanted to break away from Great Britain. 40% or so are patriots, and pretty ardent patriots. About 25% of people are still loyalists, meaning they're still loyal to the crown. They're still loyal to Great Britain, and they do not want any part of this. And then about the rest of the population, 35%, is really kind of neutral. They're uninvolved. In fact, I've told you I'm who goes to college at my age, but I'm in college, and I wrote a paper last year about this time on those neutral people. the people who were farmers, the people who lived out in the frontier areas that didn't really care. Like, if it was not affecting them directly and they lived their lives, if they were in a remote area, if they didn't have access to news and information quickly, they weren't really bothered by it. So there was a great amount of people who were really quite neutral. But after the Committee of Correspondence kind of falls through, the Olive Branch petition gets disregarded, it's on. And we'll have our first big battles. And most of it happens because of the actions of colonial militias and the Continental Army. George Washington's military leadership, he was fantastic. As a young man, he wasn't that great. As he gets older and we get into the Revolutionary War, he's really good. He is with his men. He never leaves his men. He's ardent. He's a good tactician, meaning he has really good strategy. And he's a fantastic leader. The colonists' ideological commitment and resilience, and most importantly, assistance sent by European allies. In fact, I would even underline that part, assistance sent by European allies. So we start with the Battle of Trenton. This is one of the bigger ones that we would talk about. This is, the Christmas Day. You remember when you've seen, do I have it here? No, I don't have it here. But have you ever seen the picture of George Washington? They're like crossing the Delaware and they're going to make a surprise attack on Christmas against those Hessian forces on Christmas Day. And the Hessian forces are like those German guys, and they're probably, half in the bag from too much Christmas cheer. And he makes a tactical surprise on them. So the first one, the Battle of Trenton, December 1776, it is considered a victory because it was a surprise attack. Works pretty well, but then after that, not so much. Eventually, we'll get into Valley Forge, and if any of you have been to Valley Forge, I was to Valley Forge about a year ago. Such a cool place. But Valley Forge, the winter of 1777, so Battle of Trenton is right at the end of 1776. By the time we get to 1777, and that following winter, the winter of 77, 78, they said is like historically one of the coldest on record, and it was just a horrible time. So Valley Forge, people are dying. Washington's men are like low on supplies, low on food. Disease is spreading through. It's terribly cold. It's just muddy. Everything is going wrong. Their horses are dying. It's not good at all. Then we get to 1777, and we have the Battle of Saratoga. And what I want you to know about the Battle of Saratoga, it is a turning point in the war. The Battle of Saratoga really shows that not only was it probably a military success, it was a mental success, because it shows that now these colonists, this ragtag group, could go up against the mighty British military and go to toe-to-toe. Like, they could stand up to the British military and hold their own. And that's a huge deal. In fact, such a huge deal, now this is really important, such a huge deal that the French are like, okay, so maybe we could help. And maybe us helping them can actually hurt the British, because remember that British and French rivalry is always great. And so the French, because of what happens at Saratoga, the French now ally with the colonists to help win the Revolutionary War. And to be honest, I don't know if the colonists could have won, if the patriots could have won the Revolutionary War without the help of the French. I honestly don't think they could. However, they won the Battle of Saratoga, and the Battle of Saratoga is the one that made the French be like, oh, okay, these guys aren't a bunch of crazy, backwoods farmers with pitchforks who are just trying to, go up against these redcoats. They can actually hold their own. And then eventually we get to the Battle of Yorktown. The Battle of Yorktown is really what kind of ends it. Cornwallis, Lord, his name is George. Lord Cornwallis kind of gets boxed in around Baltimore area, in the Tidewater region, around D.C., Maryland, like Baltimore mostly. and he's trapped. He's got the French at their back, and they're kind of trapped along the coastline there. And this is where the English, the British, will finally surrender. And the Battle of Yorktown is really looked at as the beginning of the end of the war. It is the final nail in the coffin. But this isn't until 1781. So we've started, 1776, and that's a really good question. Like, when do you think the Revolutionary War started? Is it when the first shots are fired? Is it the Declaration of Independence? Is it the Battle of Trenton? Like, when do you think? But we do know that it goes on until the Battle of Yorktown, which is 1781. So it's a long, hard-fought battle. All right, so I want to just actually pause right there and end with this. And so I hope you filled in your notes. And of course, when we return and are together again, we can talk about this and answer any questions or discussions that you might have. Okay, until later. We'll see you then.